it somewhere between 250 to 300 foreign journalists who are posted here on a permanent basis. Now this is changing a little bit in the last years, and what we see in Israel, I think, what we see here is also an evolution that one can see worldwide. The classical media is losing a little bit its importance and its primary role in favor of social media. And at the Foreign Ministry, we try to adapt to those changes because they have a major impact also on the way we do business, on the way we do our business. Talking to journalists is one thing, but conducting public diplomacy on social media is something totally different, and I will expand later on that issue. Now, we follow very closely the way Israel is perceived and portrayed around the world, and we see some interesting phenomena. One tends to think that the image of Israel in the world is not necessarily positive. And actually, reality is a little bit different. It depends where you look and how you look. In major parts of the world, Israel is perceived in an extremely positive way because people look at Israel not through the prism of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or not only through that prism, but rather look at Israel in a much larger way. When we look at the way Israel is portrayed in Latin America, in Africa, in India, in China, in other places as well, in Eastern Europe, by the way, what we see are mostly the positive aspects. When you ask people, and we conduct those kind of polls, of public opinion polls on a regular basis, when you ask people in many, many places around the world, when I say Israel, what does it mean to you? What are the first things that come to your mind? Usually those are extremely positive responses. It's water management, desalinization, agriculture, security, high-tech, medicine, literature and art, so positive values. The problem that we face, and the biggest challenge to us, is in Western Europe and in some media outlets in the North American continent. And this is a major challenge, and I cannot say, just because we are treated nicely in the media in Africa and Latin America, so we should ignore the media in Western Europe and in North America. Of course not. But one has to put things in a certain perspective. And it is true that in Western Europe and North America, the perception of Israel is viewed mostly according to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And despite our best efforts to explain that Israel is much more than the conflict, that the conflict is not necessarily at the heart of our existence here in Israel, those are the major issues which appear. It has many reasons. Some of them are related to the countries themselves in which we see this phenomenon, and some of them are related also to the fact that the foreign media posted here in Israel tends to report mostly on those issues because they believe that those are the interesting issues that the editor will publish and that the public wants to see. And there is here a lot of work to be done in order to change that perception. I talk often to foreign journalists based here in Israel, and explain that there is so much to see in Israel, so many interesting things, and I don't do it in order to put the conflict aside or to hide the difficulties. The difficulties exist, and they are part of our day-to-day existence, but there is much more than that here in Israel, and they are not interested. There seems to be some kind of a very rigid set of mind of, okay, I'll do a story about Israel, which means that I'll do a story which is related in one way or another to the conflict opposing Palestinians and Israelis. It's also a matter of terminology, even I make this mistake. We call it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If it is anything, it's the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. As far as we are concerned, this conflict would have been solved a very long time ago. Now, in parallel, we work here at the Foreign Ministry, and this is something quite new and very interesting, with the Arab world. We work with the media in the Arab world, and we follow very closely perceptions of Israel in the Arab world and also in Iran. And there we see something which is extremely interesting. In the last years, the perception of Israel is becoming increasingly positive. Talking to people in the Arab world, and we conduct public opinion polls via international companies, we see that the perception of Israel is really changing. And this has started more or less with the Arab Spring some 10 years ago, 8 years ago. This has changed also, and to me this is perhaps the most important thing, also in the last decade, since people started using, on a kind of a wide and democratic basis, have started using third generation portable phones. This little thing is probably the biggest instrument of change in the region around us and probably all over the world. To me, those third generation phones, and I'm not making here an advertisement for Apple, are probably just as important as the invention of print by Gutenberg, in the sense that they bring information, they bring free information to each and every person, and you cannot control it. If you are a young person in an Arab country and you have access to internet, no one can tell you lies about Israel anymore, because you can check it personally, and people do that on a permanent basis. So it's an instrument of freedom. And here at the Foreign Ministry we work a lot, when we invest a lot of time, effort and energy on developing those contacts via social media with the Arab world. We have millions of followers on our Facebook page, on Twitter, on different social media instruments, on Instagram. And the idea is to reach young people, not to tell them what to think, not to tell them what to do. I think that here at the Foreign Ministry we have abandoned any concept of propaganda and let's tell other people what is right and what is not. We have abandoned it a long time ago. It's simply to present the Israeli reality. The Israeli reality in all of its complexity, but also in all of its beauty. And the results are extremely convincing and extremely positive. We see people who contact us on a permanent basis, people who are very happy to receive videos and posts on Facebook, who understand that Israel is actually not only that Israel is not part of the problem in the Middle East, but rather that Israel is part of the solution. And this change in perception is at the basis of the major diplomatic changes that we have seen lately. The visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to Oman, the normalization or the gradual normalization that we have with the Gulf states, the possible changes that we might see in the future with Saudi Arabia. All of this is a consequence of the fact that the public is no longer brainwashed against Israel. And the public in the Arab world is no longer brainwashed against Israel, also because the Arab leaders understand that this is no longer a viable instrument. You cannot tell people lies because they can see reality for themselves. And this is to us a major change, and I think that we are just at the beginning of a revolution, of a major change that we will see in this part of the world with regard to Israel. The stumbling block is really in Western Europe and North America, where we see old perceptions with regard to Israel, where we still see this strange belief that solving the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis will actually bring peace on earth, as if the responsibility for tension is on our shoulders, and if only we would do one thing or another, then everything would be more wonderful all over the place. And we know, of course, that it is not true. I think that it's quite clear in 2018 that solving the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis will solve nothing more and nothing less than the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. And that the regional tensions, the major difficulties that this part of the world is facing, will still be there with us no matter what happens. And the consequences, by the way, of those difficulties are becoming a major challenge to Europe and potentially also to North America. You see the wave of refugees coming from the Middle East. With those refugees, we see also the increase in terror activities by extreme Muslim activists. So one thing is related to the other. Look at the region, look at the way this part of the world is changing, and see that in the eyes of the region, Israel is becoming more and more accepted. Having good relations with Israel is becoming an asset. We had a visit a couple of days ago of the president of Chad. Now, the president of Chad didn't come here because he became a member of a Zionist organization. He came here because he understands that we are a country which is able to fulfill some of his demands in order to develop his own country. If he wants to look for expertise in the area of agriculture in arid and desertic conditions, it is to Israel that he has to come. If he wants to deal with challenges regarding water and water management and water purification, it is to Israel that he needs to come. Also when it comes to security, and this is not a secret. So you have more and more countries who are increasingly demanding good and close relations with the State of Israel. And this is exactly the image that we want to project all over the world. In my job, I try not to hide the difficulties. The difficulties do exist, but they are part of a wider and broader picture, and this is what is important in this. Now, in Europe, we face now new challenges which are also reflected in the media, and I refer to the new anti-Semitism that we can see now throughout Europe in countries such as France, Germany, Great Britain, etc. Which to us now, this new anti-Semitism is the product of an unholy alliance between extreme left, extreme right, and Islamists. You have different groups of extremists coming from totally different positions, but at the end of the day, they identify with hating Israel and hating the Jewish people. When you talk or when you listen to extreme left activists, they will tell you, I'm not anti-Semitic, okay? And I'm not referring to Jeremy Corbyn, in case you were wondering, okay? I will not talk Jeremy Corbyn. If you talk to extreme left-wing activists, they will tell you, I'm not anti-Semitic. Some of my best friends are Jews, I love Jews, I have Jews in my political party, but I have a problem with Israel. The new anti-Semitism, it doesn't say I'm anti-Jewish, it says I'm anti-Israel. And one of our missions here is to clarify that there is no difference. This is a distinction or a difference without a distinction, or a distinction without a difference. When you say I'm anti-Israel, you say I'm anti-Jewish, because Israel is the legitimate expression of the Jewish people. So when you deny a people its legitimate expression, obviously you are against that people. Then you have the classical extreme right in Europe, and it still exists. We have Nazis, we have neo-Nazis, we have people who hate Jews for religious reasons. We have everything that you can think of exists there. And we have Islamists who are becoming an increasingly important factor in Europe, because there are more and more Muslims on the European continent. They start to play a role also in the political world in many countries all over Europe. And this is becoming increasingly dangerous, particularly to the Jewish communities on the European continent. It is no longer easy to be a Jew in Europe. It doesn't mean that you will be attacked on a permanent basis, but we have enough examples of people just walking in the street with a kippah on their head and being attacked because they were Jewish. The authorities don't do enough to protect the Jewish communities, and we are in constant and permanent contact with those authorities in order for them to do more. The paradox is the following. They can send soldiers and policemen to protect the synagogue, but that's not the way it should be. The way it should be that there should be no soldier and no policeman protecting a synagogue in an ideal world. the freedom of a Jewish person to pray in a synagogue should be something self-evident and should not necessarily be protected by police. But this is the reality in which we live, and we have seen it, unfortunately, also in the United States of America. Now, all this finds its expression in the media, which is becoming more and more polarized. The political polarization that we see in Western Europe, and that we see also in the United States, finds its expression also in the media. Many Europeans, and we see it, I talk almost on a daily basis to European correspondents. So the argument is as follows. Mr. Netanyahu is close to President Trump. Okay? So Israel is Trump. And since no one wants to attack Trump because Trump is too big and too strong, then let's attack Israel, which is supposedly the ally of Trump. Now, we are not the ally of Trump, we are the ally of the United States. We are friends with the United States of America. The policy and the perception here in Israel is totally bipartisan. It is not one particular president or another president. This is a long-term strategic friendship and relationship between Israel and the United States of America. But you will see that since there is this polarization in the media, the expressions are also more and more critical with regard to Israel.